Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Leading Through the Relationship Minefield. This training is brought to you by Commercial Electronics. If you would like to learn more about our recording solution, third-party quality assurance services, or Live 911, visit comelectronics.com. This webinar is part of our Public Safety Education series, and you can view our upcoming webinars on our training page at comelectronics.com/training. Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you're listening in using your computer's speaker system, you're automatically muted to eliminate background noise. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select the handset in the audio pane at the bottom right, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can submit questions about today's lesson at any time by typing your questions into the Q&A pane of the control panel, and I'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. And for those of you wanting to report this training to your state or state certification or licensing agency, send an email to training@comelectronics.com. My name is Beth English, and I'm your instructor today. I began my 911 career as a police dispatcher 33 years ago, and most recently served as a communications director before joining Commercial Electronics as the program manager for their QA program and higher ground instructor. I have my master's telecommunicator license from Texas. I'm a TCOL instructor and a past president of Texas NENA. So let's get started with our session. At the end of the session today, you will be able to identify types of relationships at work, identify ways of dealing with relationships between coworkers, list rules for handling office romances, and identify ways of recovering from office relationships that don't work out. We spend a lot of time at work. In fact, we spend more time at work than on any other activity. So it's imperative that we have good relationships with our coworkers and that we feel connected to and supported by our peers, our subordinates, and our leaders. But developing relationships can be like walking through a minefield. One misstep and everything is blown to kingdom come. So we're going to look at how your workplace relationships matter with everyone from your subordinates to your supervisors and what to do to make those difficult relationships work. Now, before we get started, I do want to take a poll. Okay, in our poll, do you have a best friend at work? Okay. Interesting. So as people are answering, we're getting a few more yeses, but for the most part, no at the moment. Okay. So let's talk about positive versus negative relationships at work. Okay, one reason workplace relationships are so important is that we all have a desire to feel connected to others as a basic human need. Interpersonal relationships have a significant impact on our mental health, our physical health, and actually our mortality risk. In fact, our physiological systems are highly reactive to positive social interactions. Now, when we experience emotional pain in the workplace, such as from being isolated or treated with disrespect, or we find ourselves at the wrong end of gossip, it affects the brain in the same area that physical pain is felt. On the other hand, when we have relationships with others that include cooperation and fairness and trust, the reward center of the brain is activated. So what this does is it encourages future interactions that promote trust and respect and confidence, which brings out the best performance in everyone. So it stands to reason that we should work on having those positive relationships, if not for the agency, then at least for our own physical health. A lot of people avoid having work friendships, but connecting with our coworkers can ultimately make us happier and more productive. In most jobs, most office jobs, it's hard to have real friendships if you never get beyond the superficial office chit-chat. But studies show that those who have a best friend at work are healthier and happier than their lone counterparts. They also have a higher level of productivity and job satisfaction. Now, in a comm center where coworkers generally sit within inches of each other, it's easier to move beyond the basic, hey, how you doing, to developing actual friendships, especially if you spend a lot of time together on a quiet shift. But besides the emotional and physical benefits of having friends at work, there are other benefits to be realized. And I apologize now for the cat noises that you're going to hear. It's a full moon, in case y'all haven't noticed. Okay, so one of the benefits of having friends at work is that it makes your job more enjoyable. Think about the times that you've been excited to go to work because you would be working the shift with your friend. You work well together as a team. You can practically read each other's minds, so you know that when it hits the fan, you're able to crank out those calls, catch each other's radio traffic, and basically leap tall buildings in a single bound. You have a sounding board for work issues. By having a friend at work, you have someone who knows what you've been through, what you're going through, and they can relate to all the pain in between. They understand your lingo, why you complain about certain coworkers, and what you mean when you talk about that officer. As many benefits as there are to having friends at work, there are just as many downfalls. One of them is that information can be leaked. If the friendship ends, there's a risk of personal or professional information being revealed. So both parties may worry that things they said about the agency, the boss, or other coworkers will be revealed to others. Cliques can form. We've probably all been in the position of being left out of a clique, but when work relationships falter, cliques can form between the ex-friend and other employees. The wrong friendships can be detrimental. Being friends with the wrong person can get you fired if the person you've chosen to befriend is a problem employee for the agency. And then promotions can affect the friendship. One employee can be promoted over the others, suddenly becoming the supervisor of their friend. Years ago, I was friends with a coworker who was also a supervisor on another shift. At one point, She decided to step down from being a supervisor in order to get a better schedule to accommodate her schooling. Now, once she was no longer a supervisor, she actually became the most difficult employee to manage. She refused to follow rules that she deemed as being stupid, and she put me in the position of having to discipline a friend or else be accused of favoritism. Ironically, she eventually became director of HR and responsible for making the rules for everyone in the city. Now, before we go on, let me ask another poll. Have you ever had a workplace friendship go south? Okay. So, of the ones answering, most of you have. A couple of you haven't. For those of you that haven't, congratulations. So, let's talk about navigating the workplace friendships. While having friends at work can be great, they can also burn out. The one thing that may keep a workplace friendship intact is values. And you can navigate a workplace friendship if you follow some simple rules. First, check your agency's policies to see if there is anything written about workplace friendships. If so, make sure you follow the rules. Now, I know that a lot of places have policies about work shift romance. Not so many places have policies about workers or coworkers being friends. Back years ago, that some companies actually did, some agencies actually did, but I don't think so many of those have those now. If your friendship compromises you or your agency, remove yourself from that situation immediately. In one agency, a new employee became best friends with several of the employees when she did her sit-along during the application process. After being hired, she was warned about getting too close to other employees too soon, but she kind of laughed it off. Eventually, one of those friendships became her downfall when she compromised herself for another employee. So if you find that your friendship compromises you or your agency, remove yourself. And then be careful about what you reveal to your friend, and be even more careful about what your friend reveals to you. Keep your friends' confidences and don't reveal anything you wouldn't want anyone else to know in the event that you part ways. Now, several years ago, I was friends with a coworker who, through a set of unfortunate circumstances in her life, became an emotional wreck. She spent hours in my office discussing the issues that had come up. There were days that she would come into my office shortly after 8 o'clock and stay until almost noon, crying and talking about everything that had happened, over and over and over. Then she would call me once she got home from work, and we would talk on the phone until bedtime. Now, initially, I had a great deal of empathy for her. I couldn't imagine being hit with all of those circumstances at once like she had been, and I tried to comfort her as much as possible. The problem was that after a while, I was being drained both physically and emotionally. I was no longer able to get my work done, and my energy was almost completely gone. And that feeling of being needed became a huge burden on my shoulders. Eventually, I had to tell her that I couldn't handle listening to all of her problems like that any longer. There had been several issues going on in my life during all of this, and I told her that, you know, she knew about none of it because she was so focused on her own problems. And I didn't say it exactly that mean. I tried to sugarcoat it as much as possible. But needless to say, that was the end of a very long friendship. Now, this whole situation was not entirely her fault. It was also my fault for letting it go on as long as it did. I should have put an end to it much sooner. So when you have a work relationship that is unhealthy to the point you want to end it, it's best to try to do it gradually rather than breaking it off suddenly. If your relationship is healthy enough, you can be direct and say that you want to spend less time with them, but few relationships are actually that healthy. So generally, you're going to have to gradually shift away from them. So for example, if you spend a lot of time with them in person, try switching to less time together and more phone calls. If you spend more time on the phone with them, then try switching to more emails. Your goal is actually to create some physical distance so you can re-emphasize your work relationship. It's up to you to draw the line. You might think of a couple of problems that you want to continue to help them with and then refer them to someone else on the other problems. In my case, she was already seeing a counselor while we were constantly discussing the issues, so I had no one else to refer her to. Now, it'll take some time to find a new balance, and your friend might fight against it, but in the end, it's going to be about your sanity and your ability to not get sucked back into your friend's issues. So let's do another poll. Have you ever been friends with your boss? Okay, so most of you say that you have. Okay. So about 3/4 to 1/4. Okay. So let's talk about another minefield to watch out for, and that's becoming friends with the boss. If you're lucky enough to have a boss that you want to spend time with outside of the office, congratulations. It doesn't happen very often. But if it does, there's some things that you'll want to consider. One of those is, what will others think? So you may be one of those whose first thought is, I don't care what others think. But it's really not that simple. Being friends with the boss can cause all sorts of issues for you, one of which is what others think and what others say. And believe me, they will have an opinion and they will have something to say. You might have some good-natured ribbing about being friends with the boss or comments about how you always get good evaluations because of your friendship. But suppose, however, that you work hard, you learn your job, you get extra training, and you finally get that promotion to supervisor. Rather than acknowledging your hard work, your coworkers say that you got the promotion because you're friends with the boss. Suddenly, that good-natured ribbing turns into accusations, and your coworkers start claiming favoritism. You want to be careful with secrets. Normally, there are some things that you don't post on social media, and there are some things that you just don't tell your boss. But when you become friends, you tend to let your guard down, and reveal some of those things. And you end up giving the person who can fire you the ammunition that they would need if that was their intention. For example, in one agency, one of the supervisors was friends with a subordinate. The subordinate, who had been a stellar employee for years, began going to work either late or barely on time. She was often disheveled and seemed to be having difficulty focusing on her work. Well, one day, she showed up to work smelling like alcohol and cigarette smoke. And when the supervisor, her friend, questioned her, she told her friend that she had been out partying the night before and was still somewhat tipsy. Now, the supervisor, also her friend, had no choice but to send her home and document her behavior and her confession. Because of the nature of the job, she couldn't allow an employee to answer 911 or work a radio position in that condition. Now, that friendship ended badly with a lot of accusations going back and forth between the two of them. Then you have constructive criticism. We all know that receiving criticism from our supervisor is hard on any day. But when the criticism comes from your friend, it's even harder to accept. You can end up with hurt feelings and potential awkwardness between the two of you. It can be even worse if you were once friends with your coworkers and you become their boss. It makes it hard to give criticism to the point that you find yourself sugarcoating everything. So rather than getting your message across as their leader, you end up giving them a watered-down version of what you needed to say, making you less effective as a leader. And then, is it worth it? All of this is to make you aware of the things you need to think about, not to discourage you from being friends with your boss. Friendships can exist between boss and subordinate in spite of the obstacles that you may face. Sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. Stand by. Sorry, y'all. Anyway, friendships can exist between boss and subordinate in spite of, any obstacles. I've been friends with all of my supervisors over the years, and even some subordinates, and I maintain those friendships today. Now, that's not to say that it's always been easy, and at times it's been downright difficult. But if you can keep work and personal life separate, it can work. Now let's talk about the mother of work relationships, the office romance. I think I just heard all of you sigh. Okay, so let's approach this very delicate subject. But first, have you ever dated a coworker? Let's do another poll. Okay, about half and half now. Okay, so we're still at about half and half. Switching a little bit. Oh, okay. More people saying no than yes. Interesting. Okay. So, all right. How common is this? Well, I may not have Googled it correctly. I was unable to find statistics on the number of first responder and ECO marriages, although I was able to find stats from last February that stated 1/3 of office relationships result in marriage. I can tell you, however, that many of my close friends are married to first responders, myself included. My husband and I have been married for 25 years. In fact, I don't think there's a one of us who doesn't know someone who is or was married to a first responder they worked with. Now, as many people as there are working in public safety, there are that many different opinions on whether or not relationships between first responders and dispatchers are a good idea. This question actually was recently posted on a dispatcher Facebook page by someone who was considering dating an officer. And the responses were very interesting. I mean, they ran the gamut from run like hell to we've been married for 40 years, go for it. Many of the respondents had stories to tell of the pitfalls that they encountered during their time dating a coworker. So let's talk about those pitfalls and some of those not pitfalls. Okay, just as there are pitfalls in being friends with coworkers, there are pitfalls in dating a coworker. In spite of advances in society, there is still a certain amount of stigma attached to dating a coworker. Another thing is you're together every single day. Regardless of how much you love each other, there is a reason that we ask for girl time or boys' night out. We need space from each other. Constantly being together can make you feel suffocated, and working together makes it a lot harder to take time off from each other. You're stuck together if it ends. This is especially hard if you had a contentious breakup. You went from being in love to hating each other, but now you have to work together. So what do? Does one of you go to another agency? Do you change shifts and take bad days off? And then you have jealousy among coworkers. You may have to listen to coworkers making snide remarks when they hear you talking to your office romance on the phone. You may have others complaining that your stud muffin is a jerk on the radio, expecting you to do something about it. But the pros, not everything about dating a coworker is negative. There are also numerous pros. For one thing, you understand each other's work. Just like being friends with a coworker, your office romance will understand issues you have at work and vice versa. When you want to vent about another officer or a coworker to someone that you can trust, you've got someone right there with you. They understand your schedule. When you have to cancel a date night because someone called in sick, they understand. When you spend all day sleeping on your day off so you can keep your body's regular schedule, they understand. You're motivated to work harder. Your coworker may now be the one that you're keeping safe on the street, so you work harder to make sure that that happens. And you're together every single day. You no longer dread going to work on your Monday because you know you're going to be with your partner. Yippee! Now, as with anything else, there are certain best practices that you're going to want to follow should you choose to go down the path of dating a coworker. First is know your policies. Many organizations have policies against employees dating and or marrying. Your agency may not have a policy against dating, but they may have a nepotism policy against coworkers being married or cohabitating. So you need to know these policies before you make any moves. And I know, the first time you see that love of your life walk in the front door, you may not have time to actually think about the city policies or the county policies before your heart goes pitter-patter. But before you go any farther, you want to make sure that you do know the policies. You want to take it slow. Try being friends first. People usually act differently at work than they do in their personal lives. Before you ruin your reputation at work, you want to find out if this person is someone you would actually want to spend time with. Don't date up or down. Although it happens, you don't want to date your boss or a subordinate. Almost every agency has a policy against this, but even if they don't, it's not a good idea. This opens both of you up to numerous legal issues should something happen. Plus, you'll have gossip with any office romance, but the rumor mill with this one can kill both of your careers. You want to keep it quiet. We all know how it is with a new romance. Everything is rosy and wonderful, and you just want to shout it out to the world. You want everyone to know that this person is yours and you are the luckiest person in the world. Don't. Just don't. First of all, no one wants to hear about it. People who are newly in love are sickening with all that lovey, gooey mess. Not to mention, your coworkers already know your new beau or beauette, and they may have different opinions about your choice. Also, if it doesn't work out, you've lost nothing by being quiet. But if you shouted it out to the world, then you will have lost some respect, possibly by some who really matter in the long run. In one agency, a couple started dating and married very quickly. Now, those who knew them told the girl not to get involved with the guy, not because they knew anything personal about him, but because he just gave them the creeps. She didn't listen to them, and she married him anyway. Within months, she started having quote-unquote accidents that resulted in bruising on her arms and on her face, and eventually she quit working, and not much longer after that, she quit having anything to do with her old friends. And you can guess what happened. It eventually came to light that he had been beating her since the beginning of their marriage. It took her years to make the move to get away from him, but her decision to marry him, in spite of what everybody said, it cost her her career, her friends, and it almost cost her life. So keep it quiet until you decide that this might be a long-term relationship. Once you decide that, then you need to work out a plan together to disclose it. Rumors may be flying by then, so if the rumor mill kicks into full gear at some point, then that may actually be the time to do it. You want to be on the same page. Set some ground rules to begin with for how you're going to keep it professional, and stay within the rules, both written and unwritten. You know that we have the most up-to-date and correct rumor mills in public safety. So have a plan for what you will do if the rumors go into full gear and things start to circle the drain. Be professional. This can't be said strongly enough. You must be professional at all times. Our jobs are difficult enough without letting romance get in the way. When you're on duty, your focus should be on what you're doing, not whom. The equipment at work is for just that, work. I can't even count the number of career changes I've witnessed from coworker romances that occurred on MDCs. We're all given rules for using company equipment, and one of those rules is, if you don't want everyone else to know what you're saying, keep it off the agency computers. Unfortunately, during coworker romances, that rule is actually forgotten. I mean, it's just gone with the wind more than any of the others. So if you don't want your messages read or your phone conversations played back to the command staff, don't say it or write it on any agency equipment. If you do, you may find yourself asking, do you want fries with that? Keep in mind, too, that any messages or emails you send can be used in a legal case for termination or sexual harassment if things go awry. Also, if you're dating a responder, keep your voice professional on the radio at all times. There is nothing worse than having to pull radio traffic recordings just to hear your subject's DL is current and clear in a sexy, sultry voice. It's disgusting. Be respectful and considerate of others. Like I said earlier, no one wants to hear about how much you're in love or that you spent the weekend in pajamas, reading books, and drinking hot cocoa. It makes others uncomfortable, and it can be very distracting at work. Keep the spats away from work. It's generally hard enough to get through the day taking domestic problem calls all day without having to hear about your domestic problems too. No one wants to be distracted by listening to you complain about your coworker and how he doesn't pick up his wet towels from the floor even after you telling him 1,000,000 times. Keep the spats away from work and away from your coworkers. Remember, these people know your other half too, but there are things they don't even want to know about him or her. Also, don't let arguments or spats affect your work. Just because you're angry at that person doesn't mean you can treat them any differently than you do any other coworker. And yes, I've pulled those recordings too, where you can tell a couple is having issues just by their responses to each other on the phone or the radio. Keep it ethical. You've got a job to do, and you know what that job is. It is the same for everyone you deal with, including your significant other. Don't spend more time or effort on doing things for your significant other that you wouldn't do for anyone else. Once office romance resulted in an employee having her personal cell phone pulled for investigations after it came to light that her significant other was texting her to check LPs and run various people rather than calling it on the phone or the radio or just running them himself in the vehicle. No one else was allowed to do that, and no one else was given the level of customer service that he was just because they were dating. Don't fall into this trap because it can be a career ender. This one's a little difficult. Don't discuss work at home. Wow, that's probably the hardest rule. I mean, what do we all talk about when we get home? Work. How did your day go, dear? Oh, it was a little tough today. I had this issue or that issue, or, oh, my day was great. I got recognized for this or that. Even if you aren't dating someone from your agency, you go home and you talk about your day and what happened at work. So how much harder would it be to refrain from talking about work when you both work at the same place? I mean, what will you talk about? The problem with working together and being together after work is that if you always talk about work, then your whole life will be about work. And seriously, who wants that? It's not good for either your relationship or your career. There are probably other things that you have in common that drew you to each other to begin with. So cultivate those commonalities and try to leave work at work. And then have an exit plan. Have a plan for what you will do if things don't work out. Like I said earlier, it's hard to continue to work together if it doesn't work out, especially if the breakup was contentious. So you need to know what you're going to do if that happens. Consider things like whether or not you will be able to continue to work together, or if one of you will have to leave the agency. Will you be able to work together without breaking down every time you hear the other person's voice? Can you separate and keep your opinions about them to yourself without attempting to turn the entire agency against them? These are the things that can make or break your career after the fallout. So you're going to need to decide which is more important to you, keeping your job or moving on. And then after the lovin', well, it was the perfect romance story, but now it's over. What do you do? Some things that I've already mentioned, but are worth going over again because this is the hardest part of the romance with a coworker. Get it out of your system. I know it's easier said than done, but we've all been through a breakup, even if it hasn't been since high school. But heartbreak is heartbreak, and getting over it still requires certain things. For me, it would be a half-gallon of Bluebell pralines and cream, schmaltzy music, and a weekend of crying. This is the part that you need to take care of first. Have your closest friends over, drink beer or wine or whatever your drink of choice is, binge on stuff you don't normally eat, complain about the breakup, and get ready to move on. Then you want to limit your interactions. When you began this journey with your coworker, you always knew this could happen. You knew you might have to swallow your pride, stamp down those negative emotions, and continue to work with them. But that doesn't mean that you need to have constant contact. So practice avoidance whenever you can. You may have to attend meetings together, speak on the phone for professional reasons, and pass each other in the hall. You can, however, probably change parts of your schedule that can help ease the tension of seeing them constantly. Maybe if there's a mandatory meeting that they're going to have 6 different times to accommodate all the different shifts, sign up for a different time slot for that meeting. If there are conferences or other meetings that you could attend on Zoom, do that instead of showing up. So, you're basically going to use the same strategy that you did in high school, because yes, it is just like high school, but it worked then, so it can work now. And then you want to channel all that energy. So rather than watching to see what your coworker is doing or who he or she is dating now, put all of that energy into work. It's amazing to see what can be done when you are so focused on your work. You can rearrange the warrant files, take on all the validations yourself, audit all the missing person entries, or just leap tall buildings in a single bound. The more you keep your mind focused on other things, the better you will be at work, and you actually might even end up impressing your boss. And then think long and hard about the situation. Since you spend so much of your time at work, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have a romance there. What you want to think about, though, is whether that office fling was worth all the extra caution. It might have been, but maybe it wasn't. It may be that the experience was just enough to tell you to avoid those situations in the future. Okay, let's take a last poll. Would you ever date a coworker again? Okay. Not only no, but okay. A yes, but a lot of not only no, but. All right. I can tell you that even though, like I said, my husband and I have been married for 25 years, I would never date a coworker again. It's just one of those things that I've done it worked out fine, but, personally, I would not want to tempt the fates again. So, let's talk about managing that office romance. One of your employees got involved in a relationship with a coworker. Does that mean any extra work for you? Absolutely. Sometimes managing an office romance can be harder on those around them than the parties involved. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing you do is you accept it. It's going to happen, so you might as well accept the reality of it. Keep your sense of humor and keep a level head. Some managers tend to go off the deep end thinking that their coworkers dating just because maybe it wasn't done in their time, or they've done it themselves. They see the pitfalls. They know what's going to happen, and they don't want to see it happen in their center. It's going to happen. Just accept it, and let's move on. Talk about it. Don't press your employees for details, but do let them know that you're available if they want to talk to you about seeing someone in the office. An employee may feel that it's necessary to let you know that they're dating a coworker, whether it's someone in the same office, in your same communication center, or it's a first responder. Obviously, if it's somebody in your same communication center, that brings up a whole nother set of issues because that changes scheduling, overtime issues, and when you have partners or married couples working in the same communication center, it doubles every problem that one of them has. And I can tell you, I had a couple that was married that worked for me at one agency, and every time something happened or there was an event, there was a school event for the child, both of them had to be off to go. If somebody's parent had a health issue, both of them had to be off to take care of it. If they sold the house, both of them had to be off to move. So every issue that one employee has is going to be doubled if you have people in the same department or the same division dating or marrying. So this is one of the things that you will definitely want to talk to your employee about if it gets to that point. You want to understand sexual harassment. Don't leave anything to chance. Understand what constitutes sexual harassment. If you have questions about it, work with your HR department and make sure that you are up to speed. Because sometimes what starts out as a romance ends up with claims of sexual harassment, and you need to be ready. I think we've all seen stories of on the news of people who were dating and then had a fight. One of them claimed sexual harassment, and the next 2 years are spent in court, and the person being accused is raked over the coals, loses this job, loses her job, and all of it because somebody got mad and just claimed sexual harassment. So you definitely want to understand that and make sure that you're on board with your HR department. Don't pry. Give your employees plenty of opportunities to come to you and tell you that they're dating a coworker, but don't ask. Unless you have a pressing business-related need to know, keep quiet. Set boundaries. Make sure your dating employees know to keep the PDAs out of the office. You don't need to make a big deal about it, but it's best to make sure that your other employees are taken care of, and they don't want to see the PDAs any more than you do. And then set the standard. If things don't work out with the employees, it's going to cause some amount of disruption at work. When it does, you'll need to have a one-on-one with your employee and let them know that the situation can't be showing up at work, dragging all the other employees into the drama. Basically, zero tolerance for any type of fallout drama. And that's going to be the standard. Now, before we get to questions, I want to remind you to tune in next month, same bat time, same bat channel, on Wednesday, January the 6th at noon Central Time for our next webinar. It's Excited Delirium, an overview for ECOs. Now, although it's been said that police are using excited delirium to justify police brutality, it's an actual diagnosis by the National Institutes of Health. So join us for this overview of what exactly excited delirium is, and if there are any steps that you can take to help your responders when it happens. Any questions? If you have any questions, send them to me in the Q&A pane, and I will answer those questions for you. In the meantime, let me remind you that if you need information on today's lessons for continuing education credit, send an email to training@comelectronics.com. Thank you for joining us. This presentation has been made possible by Commercial Electronics, provider of public safety solutions, including Higher Ground NG 911 recording, Live 911, and CQIP third-party quality assurance program. Now, I will leave this up for a couple of minutes to let anybody submit any questions that they may have. Otherwise, have a great day, a great rest of the month, and Merry Christmas.